share this screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about reports today, but what I wanted to start off with is what happens on the student side that corresponds with the reports. So what I did is I actually opened up an incognito window so that I could have a student side by side with my teacher account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull this one. I'm going to grab this shareable link. And then I'm going to stick that in here for this kiddo. And so this kiddo, he already has an account. And so notice once he went to that shareable link, he just went straight into the activity. Like, we know that students can easily get, distracted. And so we try to get them pushed as quickly as possible into the activity. So I wanted to show you what's going to happen over here as the student is working. And so if I increase in here, I'm going to open up my reports over here. And so I'm on the hypothesis section, and I wanted you to see that I am actually, you have to make this bigger just for a second. Okay, this is the section I'm on right now, is this identifying my independent variable, my dependent variable, and whether I'm aligned with the goal. So this is the third tutorial in the series. And so Rex the tutor is on for the entire time period. So right now, Rex, if I just randomly choose like a tautology, because that's what kids do all the time, then Rex is going to pop up and he's going to try to help them. And he has quite a bit of assistance he can give. And so if this kiddo keeps just choosing things like height of the tower is an independent variable, but it's not the independent variable in the goal. And time to the end of the ramp is a dependent variable, but it's not the dependent variable in the goal. So if I choose these, Rex is going to pop up again. It's like, hey, great job, but let's look at the goal. And then he's going to give them all the information saying, okay, you need to have size of the sled, you need to have distance traveled, and whatever. I say this part is not scored. We're just looking for them to make a hypothesis so that they can test that hypothesis. But what they put here is not scored because we're not expecting the student to have this, like the science standard, like the DCI, like the actual understanding of the science yet. We're just looking to see whether they can identify the independent variable, the dependent variable, and be aligned to the goal. So at this point, it's going to go forward. And at this point, now we're going to move into, can I target my independent variable and control my investigation? So let's say that the kiddo runs their first trial and they just random, because kids do this all the time, right? I helped design this lab, and so I am a big fan of just changing all the different variables because I love seeing the changes. And then Rex is going to pop up and he's going to try to help this student in as many ways as possible. So let's go back and actually do the trials that we were supposed to do. He's going to size of the sled. And actually test those. And then we can move on. And students will often try to do just one trial and move forward, like one thing is enough. And I just try to tell my students, like, if you're being prescribed a new medication for something, would you want to know that it worked on one person or lots? Like, right, we want to have lots of trials before we say we're okay with something. So when I increased and they need to be aligned here, the size of the sled, then the total distance traveled, then let's go over here, then increased. Now, if it had decreased, students never want to say this. So they'll say the system is broken before they'll say that they were wrong. So it's important for them to understand that they can be wrong at this point. They can say does not support and still get 100%. It's more important to either affirm or refute your hypothesis correctly than like to be perfect from the beginning. Like you can improve and say it doesn't support my hypothesis and get 100% on the labs, but it did increase in this point, in this section. And so the first, let me see if I can get this to scroll over a little bit. Yeah. The first thing that we're looking for in this section is whether they can construct their claim. That's this section. And then whether they can warrant their claim. So can they correctly choose which trials support this claim? And this is something adults have problems with. So obviously students are going to struggle here too. And you'll see students who will just grab one trial. And in actuality, we need to be able to say, okay, the size of the sled and only the size of the sled increased. And so the total distance traveled then also increased. And then from here, the student's going to move into their claim evidence reasoning section. And I'm just gonna literally grab this and copy it just because I wanna move forward and talk to you about reports to be done here as a student. And then let's see what happened. So he can see how he did. Not so great on the goal. I needed quite a bit of help from Rex. Not so awesome on my collecting data. I needed a lot of help from Rex. I did pretty darn good on the analyzing. So this is not consistent with what a student would usually do. This is the hardest skill. I just have lots of practice and didn't mess around too much. But this would be very different than what we typically would see with students. Typically, hypothesis is the first skill they master, then collecting data, then analyzing. Data is more typical of what we would see as the orange here. Even higher level AP students tend to really struggle with this skill when they first start. And then I did pretty well in explaining findings because I copied the exact terms that I needed to copy, but obviously didn't do perfect. I could have improved. So this is the work that your student could see. So if you wanted to, you could ask students to take this and then attach this in Google Classroom or whatever the LMS is. You could ask them to graph their pertinent data, like the important data, they could graph it. That's something that I had my students do, and then attach it to their labs and then mark the lab as complete in Google Classroom or whatever LMS you're assigning through. That's just a suggestion. That's what I did. And then I would give them a chance, like if they saw that they didn't have a perfect score here, what would you change? You know, what did you learn? How could you demonstrate improvement and have them, take it a step further? Or you can just reassign a lab, depends on what you want to do. But okay, I'm going to get out of this student and I'm going to put this full screen so we can talk about what we just saw. So when we come to reports the first time, let's go back here. When we come to reports the first time, there's some information to help you. When you have students start, it's going to be in orange. And when they've all completed that, it's going to turn to green. Dark blue is good, it's proficient. Intermediate is light blue, and novice is orange. But something I'd like you to notice is please don't pull the scores across, like straight across, because we would consider a student proficient if they have a 71. And obviously, if you're on a 0 to 100 scale, a 71 is generally not considered proficient. So if you're pulling these scores across into your grade system, I would use some sort of system that accounts for that. And then here are some documents to help you. These rubrics can be really, really helpful for students. Like this one goes through telling students in that hypothesis phase what they need to have if they want to get a 4. And then same thing in collecting data. And then for analyzing, the way I showed you, it broke it out into 2. This is the ability to construct that claim. And then this is the ability to support that claim with evidence. And then we also have this rubric for claim evidence reasoning. And this is very, very helpful to students who are struggling. I've even been in higher level high school courses where they say, oh, I've got this. And then I like hand it to one student, and the other students after a little bit are like, hey, can I get a copy of that? And they say it really quietly, because in the end, like I've seen teachers who don't quite know what to write in reasoning. And so having this in front of you can really, really, really help, particularly right now where we're all struggling a little bit with lots of new things. So I just completed this activity. See, 2 students have been assigned the activity and 2 students have completed it. And by assigned, we mean like they have accessed it, right? They've clicked on the link to come into our system. This is not, this doesn't like pull in the number of students from your Google Classroom. And so this is once they've accessed the system, they'll show here. And then we can open this up and let's look at Julian Garcia, because that's the kiddo that we just looked at. And this is the activity, this advanced tutorial. And okay, so this kiddo really identified an independent variable. Now, if you remember, I didn't identify the independent variable that was consistent with the goal, but from the beginning, I had an independent variable. So I got 100% on that score. I really struggled to find a dependent variable because I kept trying to write a tautology. And I struggled with the goal alignment because I wasn't paying attention to the goal at first. And then I was playing around a lot. And so I wasn't controlling my investigation or targeting my independent variable. And then I didn't play around at all and I got right to work. And so that's why I have the 100% here. My claim was pretty darn good claim because I copied it. And my evidence, I must have had some really good terms in there because I did okay, but my reasoning was really, really struggling in there. And so if I wanted to do a better job, I could follow that rubric. And I could look at the student's work if I click here, or if we go back to here, if I wanted to see student work, I could download my spreadsheet. And then I could play around with the columns and I could look at all of my student responses. Like in actuality, I've never had a class of 2, you know, so when I have a class of 32, being able to look at all of their answers in a spreadsheet is really helpful. And if I want to see this activity, I can use the magnifying glass. And if I want to dig into a specific student just for this activity, I can open that. But if I want to actually dig deeply into that student, I can click on their name and then dig into the activities. And like this is seasons, so a topic lab, so multiple goals in the same activity. And so I can open that up and see how Julian was doing there. And I think that I've dug pretty deeply. Oh, individual student reports. This is really helpful for seeing like toward like later, once the students have done a number of activities, being able to see their growth. And obviously these are just accounts that I created. So this is all me in here playing around. And so that's why we're seeing some scores that don't quite make sense. Like generally you would never see a student do 100 here. You would see the 100 start to develop here, and then, you know, then they start to get better at collecting data and then analyzing data. And writing is really interesting because some students do really well with writing, but not really well with actually doing the science. And then some students do really well with the science and terrible with the writing. So it's really nice to see these right next to each other and be like, oh my gosh, this kid is really good at the science, but they're really struggling with the writing, or vice versa. It's just interesting to see that information. But I really like this view once my students had 4 or 5 different activities to be able to see the growth of my students, which you're not seeing quite the way you normally would, because this is all just me playing around. But this is a great view for seeing student growth. And then again, you can download for your specific class. I could rearrange by assignment. If I had used all my class periods appropriately, I would be able to see, you know, my first period classes would all be together, and then my second period, and then first period would be by the date. So I would be able to see activities as they were completed. And I think, and then I can click in and see all my students, which would be a much, much longer list normally. And I think that's it. I wanted to see if you have any questions.
I think right now, as far as reports go, I have a pretty good handle on it, but all I've really assigned right now are just the basic tutorials for the flowers and then the flower lab that went with it.
Yeah.
So that's all I've really used so far this week. But I've been going into reports like back and forth since like the first person did anything.
Yeah. It's so nice to have that. That was like, flower was the very first thing I started off with my students. It was like, whoa, like it's just nice to be able to see that information populating right away and seeing how they're doing. And something I did is just, I went back to some, for some of my kiddos, they might need more practice in this system. But then with some of them, I was just taking them back to thinking about a lab in a really simple format and just having them talk it through with me. Like, if we were going to go plant some beans, which almost every kid did that at some point in elementary school. Like if we were going to go plant some beans and we wanted to test one thing, what would we test? And then just kind of taking them back to a basics to kind of help them work through these skills. Flower's a hard one in the fact that there's not much that they could like take it further and graft, right? Because we tried to make it as simple as humanly possible so that we could really get to the core of those science practices and kind of help them work through those struggles before they move into labs that are going to have science vocabulary, which can be difficult for some students because science is like learning a new language sometimes. So, yeah.
A question I do have that isn't directly related to reports, but is there a way to have a student view without creating like a fake student?
Yeah, when you're in here, you can go to preview.
So I guess, yeah, because I've been able to find that.
Okay.
I guess it's more along the line of, I'm wondering what's on their dashboard. So you had shown that when you went into the students, but I was just wondering, without creating a fake student, is there a way to see what their dashboard looks like?
No, that's a really good idea. Yeah, like view student view in this class or something along those lines. Yeah, we don't, other than creating a fake student, we don't have a way for you to see that view I showed you in the incognito window. Yeah. We don't have a way of just clicking on what the student is seeing in their home screen right now. So like some things that are really helpful is to know, whether the student is Google connected or Clever connected, because sometimes they'll create their account and they think they linked to Google, but they didn't. And so having this and being like, oh, hey, you're struggling to get in because you're not connected to Google. This is your username, and how about do you remember what your password is? Do you want to, let's make it our school mascot or whatever, and change their password and give them their username and their password so that they can get logged in. And then they can go to settings just like you can, and only they have less information in their settings, but then they can go into their information and click to connect to Google once they're logged in, if they created their account without Google or without Clever, whatever it is they need to do. But I will definitely share that feedback. That would be a great thing to be able to just see, what does this look like from the dashboard? Like, we're giving you the individual view of what the lab looks like, but it's helpful to be able to see from a student side what happens.
Yeah, because I've gotten a couple messages. So I've been able to use preview because they're like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this? It's like, preview. And I click on the thing. It's like, oh, yeah, so you need to do this, so it sounds like I know exactly what I'm talking about when I'm sending them information. But having seen that student view was really helpful. Because then I can always reference them to say, all right, check on see my progress or check on see my work.
Yes. And then next, hopefully by Monday, so because this might be surprising, but because we've had a little bit of an influx in teachers, and by little bit, I mean like 1,000-fold, we had to take Inkblotter offline temporarily because what happens is as students are working, it's populating in real time. And it was just so much information that we had to actually add 2 more servers, like triple our capacity
Wow.
overnight. And so we're trying to figure out how to get that all to run smoothly using triple the capacity we used to have. And so that's why it's offline right now, and we'll hopefully be ready by Monday. But once that's ready, I am going to do another webinar where I'll talk specifically about Blotter in detail. But just so you know, once you see this like not saying offline, when you're at your desk working, you could just open this tab. And if you have it open anywhere and you get a student messaging you with questions, you could click into Blotter and you could find that student. So let's say I had a ton in here. I could just do like a control F and look for Ramona. So let's just say I had like pages and pages. I could just find Ramona. And then I can see what's going on with Ramona. And I can see what the independent variable is, what the dependent variable is. Let's say Ramona was on her third lab. I'd be able to see every single struggle that Ramona had. And this will populate while your kids are working. So you don't have to keep it up and stare at this. But you have to have the tab open if you want it to populate. So I would just, when you're working, open it up, leave it there, do all the 50,000 different things that you're doing. And then if you're contacted by a student, you can open that up. And again, they're trying to get that. We've got three guys just working on getting this going again. And hopefully it'll be ready before Monday, but by Monday is what they've told me.
Right.
So, and I'll do a webinar about that. Is there anything else? Because I didn't want to take a ton of your time.
Nope, because I'm going to be in the webinar tomorrow. So if I have any other questions, I'll bring them up tomorrow.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, see ya.